I'm Tom Francis. This is the first, extremely brief, I think, entry in, I guess, what will eventually become the development blog for this, which I'm just going to call GHGC for now, and it's the first steps towards a prototype, which would be the first step towards what could eventually, if it works, become my next game, but probably not. Probably something going horribly wrong. And this is what I have so far. It's pretty impressive, I think you'd agree. Believe it or not, this is my second Unity project. I actually made one before this, following tutorials, which looked fairly similar. Looked even more like Thomas Was Alone. I had to start again because following tutorials I was doing just everything they told me to, and most of it wasn't relevant to actually what I wanted to do. So all I'm trying to do with this is get movement working. As you can see, you can move left and right. Good feature. And the most important thing, which I spent most of today on, is when you're mid-air, you can't change direction. Your movement keys stop working when you're in mid-air, which doesn't happen by default. And when I first put in movement, I could like float through the air and also like cling myself to the side of the building. Because the big difference between the way I'm doing movement here in Unity versus how I did it in Gunpoint is that I'm using Unity's physics engine. So your player is a physics object, and he has kind of built-in friction and gravity, and all the collision stuff is kind of already technically kind of taken care of, although Lord knows it's not exactly easy to figure out how to interface with that. So the game is just, right now, a camera, which is how you see things in the first place, 2 floors, the player, and 2 lights, and that's the sum total of the actual complexity of it. These things down here are like the assets, so those 2 are textures, these 2 are bits of code, and that's the level that I'm playing. And then the code looks like this, and this is the bit that's been a fucking nightmare. So I've only really touched on Unity very briefly in a few spare moments since Gunpoint came out, and that's a terrible way to learn things, because I'm doing like an hour and then there'll be 30 days where I don't get a chance to learn anything new, and then I do another hour and I've forgotten everything I learned last time. Today has been my first full day of just messing around with Unity and figuring out how things work, and so I finally got something working. I mean, this looks almost identical to what I had this morning, only now it like doesn't break horribly, or nothing about this behavior is outright fundamentally wrong. Like, the game will involve you moving on a flat floor left and right, and if you fall, you fall. That's about as simple as it gets, but that wasn't working this morning and it is working now, so I've achieved something. But it's been incredibly painful and frustrating and slow. I mean, I guess like I've only spent 1 day, so I shouldn't really be saying that yet, but for me, coming off Game Maker, where I know that language intuitively now, and I can just, when I know what I want to achieve, I can just write it like fluently. Going back to just knowing nothing and just being the class idiot, and everything I type in Unity is wrong in 9 different ways. It's just absolutely the simplest thing. I can't write 1 + 1 in this yet. I don't know how to do that. And if I try and, like right here, this -0.5f, you will not believe how long it took me to figure out that I had to put f on the end of that. Because if you put -0.5, it thinks you're trying to use a type of variable that you haven't declared properly, and then it crashes, but it doesn't give you any information about it whatsoever. There is no error report at all. Like in my first day with Unity, I got into a state where it won't tell me what's wrong, but also won't compile, which is just maddening. Anyway, I've got it working now. So the game, you can't jump yet, and that is because you won't be able to jump. Jumping won't be the main movement mechanic in this, and the movement mechanic that you will be using is not an especially original or crazy one. It's one that's been used in various contexts, but never quite in this kind of game that I want to make. And I'm not going to tell you what kind of game I want to make, and if I do basically my next job is to prototype that movement mechanic. It will be a little bit different to how it's worked in other games, and in my head it's really, really cool and satisfying and fun, but I need to know if it actually is satisfying and fun when I build it. So that'll be the next thing I build, even though it's probably one of the hardest things to code in the whole game. Just because if that doesn't work, there's no point in doing this game. If that doesn't work, I just abort the entire thing. I've got like thousands and thousands of words of design stuff, which I've written just because it's much easier to find the time to edit a document than it is to sit down with Unity and start it up and watch tutorials and actually learn something and get somewhere. So I spend a lot more time designing it than I have making it, which is always a bit of a risk because sometimes things don't work in practice, and that may well be the case here. And in fact, several times today it's looked like coding in Unity and C# in particular is just so brutally hard that I was seriously thinking about giving it up forever and just saying, okay, fine, I'll never learn another language, I'll just make things in GameMaker and then hire a programmer to make it for me in Unity. But I don't like that idea because I really like Unity. This if we look at the player here, all this stuff over here they're called components, and they're little modular things that you can plug into an object, and you can plug them into any object. So if I can show you a weird example of this. By default, my movement control script is attached to the player, so my keys move the player. But if I wanted to, I could take it off him, and so just uncheck that. I think that just disables it temporarily. And then I'm going to put the key controls on the camera, which is a nutty thing to do. But now, hopefully, my keys do absolutely nothing. Oh, because the camera doesn't have a collider, but I can add that. Physics, box collider. Let's see if that works. It's going to want a rigid body as well, isn't it? Maybe not. Okay, this doesn't work at all. This clearly illustrates the point that I do not yet understand Unity. In an earlier iteration of this worked brilliantly. This was great. Rigid body, there we go. Let's see if that does anything. Oh no! Okay, that is working as intended. That is the simulation being perfectly reasonable and saying, hey, if this is a physical object, it would be falling because it's not attached to anything. It's just in space. So yeah, that's how satisfyingly modular it all is. I really love the just the concept of how it works. And I hate actually coding for it because you have to use a proper programming language, and the programming language you use in GameMaker is called GML, and it's very forgiving. It's very it'll just interpret roughly what it thinks you mean and then make that work, and that's fantastic if you're a beginner because you don't have to get anything right. And going to a really strict language after that is horrible. But if I did stick with GameMaker and I got someone else to do all the programming on all my games, it would mean I could never dive in and do something myself. I would always just be waiting on someone else to actually make everything happen. And I don't like that idea, really. I'd much rather just be basically conversant in how Unity works so I can at least use it, and then I probably will still get a programmer to do the actual hard work because I want it to run well, and I'm thinking vaguely about multiplayer if it's viable. Probably won't be. But that would certainly be something I can do myself. Netcode is going to be way beyond me. So anyway, that's your first extremely unhelpful look at a completely mysterious game. You can tell it's going to be the same perspective as Gunpoint, I guess, and you can probably guess that the tall, thin thing that is moving around is probably going to be a human being of some kind. And that's about all I'll tell you. Thanks for watching.